So has the president lost touch on issues like the mosque debate or bigger concerns like the economy? Joining me here in Washington, Democratic pollster Peter Hart. He's the chairman of Hart Research. Faiz Shakir, he's the vice president of the Center for the American Progress. In New York, Rehan Salam of the National Review Online. And in Atlanta, our CNN contributor Eric Erickson, who's the editor-in-chief of the conservative breadstate.com. Let me start in the room here with those left of center. No regrets for what, Peter? Meaning that he stepped into the debate or that he stepped back a little bit after?
I have to assume no regrets for stepping into the debate. In terms of stepping into the debate, I think he did the right thing in terms of just making the point. I think you could fault the remarks on Saturday and Sunday, but did he make the basic point? The answer is yes, and it was an important point.
But Faiz, if you look at media reporting, a lot of Democrats out there saying, I wish the president weren't talking about this. When we talk to them, they say we have a tough enough year. We don't need to be distracted by this. The New York Daily News reports today that Rahm Emanuel, the White House chief of staff, is calling around saying, please don't criticize the president. Please, let's all try to turn the volume down on this. And then the president answers that question today.
Yeah, no regrets, because he's the president who has a duty to fulfill his responsibility to uphold the Constitution. And he's saying that I have done that. It's my responsibility. I've spoken up for the right of freedom of religion for Muslims. I think I would have liked to have heard him say that he also believes that it's smart for Muslims to build, American Muslims to build this mosque near Ground Zero. I think that this particular project is one that they want to endorse. But I'm glad that he's still sticking by his position, and I think it's going to hopefully create the contrast between the hate mongers on the conservative side who want to turn this into a nasty debate over tolerance and whether we accept minorities in this country.
Well, I want to bring the conservative voices into the conversation, but first I want you to listen, gentlemen, Rehan and Eric. This is the president speaking at a fundraising luncheon for Ted Strickland while out in Ohio today. And remember, it is President Obama who escalated this by speaking out Friday night and then again Saturday. But he seemed to suggest with these remarks, he didn't specifically mention the mosque issue, but he seems to be suggesting here, as Faiz just said, that some people are trying to take political advantage.
When times are tough, it can be easy to give in to cynicism, and it can be easy to give in to fear. To set our sights lower. To settle for the status quo. To pit people against each other. To find wedge issues.
Rehan, a political opportunism on behalf of the president's critics or a legitimate point of discussion?
I have to say, I think that political opportunism can be found on all sides of the political spectrum. Faiz, for example, wrote a terrific blog post back in 2006 about a lot of Democrats, including Senator Charles Schumer, who pointed to Dubai Ports World as a grave threat to American national security, whereas in fact this is a multinational firm that had run ports throughout the world quite efficiently, effectively, and fairly without any real security risk. Yet a lot of Democratic politicians saw that as an opportunity to bash a Republican president. In a similar vein, you get a lot of political opportunism now as well. And I think the president himself, President Obama, has used this kind of political opportunism to brand his opponents as extremists when in fact they have different views about taxes and spending. And I think that it's contributed to a real corrosive quality and to a real antagonism in our public debates that is depressing, I think.
Eric, Carly Fiorina, the Republican Senate candidate in California, said, you know, if the point of this is to unite America, those who want this cultural center and mosque near Ground Zero should pick a new location. It was a big debating point in a congressional debate down in Florida the other night among the Republican candidates. Some strategists in the Republican Party say, ladies and gentlemen, this is about the economy. Stop talking about this. What do you believe?
You know, I think this is a great issue overall for the Republicans, not because of the mosque per se, but because there's this growing sense in middle-class America, not those reaches within 50 miles of either coast, but within, say, 200 miles of the Mississippi River, that the political class in Washington and the New York corridor has lost its way and lost touch with the people they supposedly represent and talk to from TV cameras or newspapers, and there's a big disconnect. 70% of the public doesn't want this, and they're referred to as hate mongers and bigots and what have you.
Do you think that this should even be a political issue? Why is it a political issue?
Oh, it has become a political issue.
But it should not be.
To open his mouth.
Can we just agree that it shouldn't be? That this is one of American values? This is about defending the Constitution and the right?
It became a political issue when those who raised their concerns about it were labeled bigots, particularly by the political left.
I would argue, Eric, that it was people on your side, conservatives, people like Newt Gingrich, Sarah Palin, who injected this into the debate. Of course, these Muslims wanted to build this mosque.
Faiz, this has been a debate for several months in New York City. There have been a lot of folks who have been talking about this since the spring, and it's true that it became a national issue, but I think that actually Eric has a decent point. When you start characterizing people as bigots who are raising these concerns, it tends to polarize the debate, and it's useful for some folks to fundraise, etc., by saying that, you know, we're under attack from bigots, etc., rather than that, you know, there's some sensitivities here. And I happen to think that this should be a local issue. It should not be a national political issue. But the truth is that we are all taking part in this, including the news media.
But because the president spoke out and elevated it, it was already a national conversation. The president, without a doubt, elevated it. Because of that conversation, others are weighing in. And I want to ask, Peter's been quiet for a minute, but I want to read Franklin Graham, the nationally known evangelist. He said this to Time magazine, moving this debate, in my view, beyond a conversation about this particular mosque and cultural center in New York or anywhere else in America to something that is bigger and potentially more troubling. Here's what Franklin Graham said. President Bush and President Obama have made great mistakes when they said that Islam is a peaceful religion. It is not. There is no evidence in its history. It is a religion of hatred. It is a religion of war. It's not a Republican issue or a Democrat issue. This is something that is at the very core of this country. Peter Hart, do the American people feel that way?
There's a lot that's in this, but what it really comes down to is something much bigger, and that is society's not working. And we look, whether it's the economy, whether it's the environment, whether it's education, all the big issues, and we look at what's happening on Wall Street and everything else. And so you get into a debate like this, it's not going to solve the fundamental problems. It's off on the sidebar, but it is what's easiest to discuss. And what happens is, and my colleague Dan McGinn put it well, he said that it's really about sensitivities more than anything else. And it's the sensitivities not only in terms of the mosque, it's also the sensitivities on the Confederate flag, and it's the sensitivities of Glenn Beck deciding that he's going to hold a rally on the anniversary of Martin Luther King's famous March on Washington. All of this has to do with taking us apart rather than the sense of how do we build consensus in society.
I'd love to address the comments about Islam, if I might. I mean, the thing to keep in mind is that when you're talking about a group of 1.2 billion people, an important thing to keep in mind is that there are Muslim minorities like the Ahmadiyas who have been attacked by al-Qaeda and other Islamic extremists. This is just an incredibly diverse group of people. And the idea that you can say anything, that it is a wicked religion, is frankly absurd, because you have a lot of different tendencies. And I think that that's one thing that a lot of folks don't understand, that just like Christianity is very diverse, Islam is very diverse too. And there are tendencies within it that have to be condemned, and there are other tendencies within it that are really part of the rich fabric of religious diversity that's been part of this country for a long time.
You remember that President Bush, you got to give him credit, stood up and said that Islam is a religion of peace many times, made this point explicitly clear. Then President Obama, following on those footsteps, made this a centerpiece of his agenda, that in his inaugural, he told the Muslim world, I'm going to reach out to you. He said it again in Cairo, said that this is something that was important to him. And when he sees the defilement of the Muslim community, he almost has this responsibility. If this is something that's important to him, to step up and say, we can't have this estrangement here in America.
But Faiz, I also think that Americans have a right to ask questions about Muslim leaders who have extreme views. And I think that when you try to shut down that conversation by saying that you're necessarily a bigot to raise those questions, I don't think it's terribly productive.
See, this is exactly why I think this debate in building the mosque at Ground Zero is unhelpful, for the very simple fact that if this is supposed to be done for outreach, as the people who are building it have said it's going to do, it's raised not just nationally, but in New York City and in New York, roughly the same percentages of people opposed to it. If I, as a Presbyterian, were to go to some place like Ground Zero in another country and try to build a church there, and the people said, 69% of the people said no, I wouldn't be doing very good outreach. And so it's problematic.
So let's help them, Eric. Here's the issue. These guys, this imam who's leading this mosque has been a goodwill ambassador on behalf of the State Department for both the Bush and Obama administrations. Not only, he's got no problem. What argument do you have against this particular imam?
Well, I have a particular argument about this imam in that he's made statements saying the United States is partly to blame for 9/11. He's had Hamas now endorse his mosque. He's gone overseas and changed the book that he's publishing in this country. He's got it under a different name overseas where he's calling on people to impose Sharia on the United States. What he says overseas is different from what he says here, and I've got a real problem with that.
This particular man has been the center point of building a moderate Muslim identity here in America. If you believe in the concept of having moderate Muslims and peeling them off from a radical element, this is the guy that you want to support. You want to support him.
If this is the guy we've got to support, then we have a bigger problem.
All right, I'm going to call a quick time out here. When the president went to Ohio today, this was not his intention to re-stir this feisty debate we're having. So why was he there? And why do you need to care about what happens in that pivotal state? We'll be right back.
We got married in a